Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fond Cast, the Fond Pod. It is friends occasionally not disagreeing. Mini episode time here for you. This is Cody, as per usual. And I am starting a new endeavor. I won't even get into what I've been up to. We'll save those for the big ones. But I am starting an ambitious summer project, which I'm sharing with all of you here in the Fond world. That's right. Talking about the 60th anniversary of James Bond coming to America. Now, technically, last year, 2022, was the 60th anniversary of James Bond's first film in England. That would have been Dr. No. So you're looking at that way as counting. I guess last year would have been the 60th anniversary. But I thought maybe it'd be fun to take a look at these films this summer since I had some extra time. I know I've only seen some of these films all the way through. I've seen some of these films in their entirety, and there's actually quite a few of these films that I don't think I've ever seen, save for maybe like 5 minutes in between commercials here and there on like TBS or whatever they used to run on back in the day. So I thought this would be fun for a couple of reasons, because I have the time, I haven't seen all the movies, and of course, as you know, on this podcast, we like to rate things and rank things. And so I thought it might be fun to take a look back at these Bond movies. All right, so there are a lot of Bond movies, as you well know, quite a few in what they call the EON universe that basically is the main Bond timeline or franchise, if you will. And then we had a couple kind of oddball James Bond movies that were made over the years as well. I've included all of those together in a handy dandy list, and I've come up with the perfect rating system. This is absolutely certifiably perfect, which means I just made it up off the top of my head. But we're going to go with it as is, all right? So for each of these films, we're looking at a possible Metacritic critical score, user viewing guide number, whatever you want to call it, the perfect number to put on this movie, with the scale of 100 being the best possible movie ever, and a score of 0 being absolute literal dog shit, because there wouldn't even be a film that could score that low, literally. But I thought we'd take these through our classic or crap criteria that we do here on the podcast. And I'm thinking, let's say if there's maybe a 60 would be a D in school, that would be passing. But I don't know that that's good enough to watch a movie, because you would at least want to watch a movie that is average or higher. So I'm going to count that as 70 out of 100. So for this summer series, the 60th anniversary of James Bond in America, we're going to count a score of 70 out of 100 as a passing grade. In other words, that's a classic movie that you should watch. If it's below 70, it is crap, and don't waste your time. All right, here's how I broke down the 100 points for the score on this. So you get 5 points for just the title of the movie. Does it make sense? Is it intriguing? Does it have to do with the actual plot of the movie? Is it clever, etc.? 10 points for the theme music, because I love to argue music with friends, and I especially love to argue with people about the Bond themes, okay? Years back, I ranked these all way before, there were even some of these more recent films out. And I'm sure on a future podcast, I probably can convince the guys, the other hosts, to go back and argue about these themes again. So I'm looking at things like, how original is the song? Does it have a good sound to it? There might even be a point or two thrown in for those opening credits, which are so iconically Bond, with the, very Art Nouveau shadows and silhouettes and things going on that are geometric prisms, etc. So we're at 15 points. You're going to get 15 points for the portrayal of Bond in that movie. So how was he, in terms of a character and his acting portrayal by whoever it was, starting with Sean Connery here with these early films? Is it a good job? Did he hit his lines? Does he look like he's comfortable? Fight choreography, etc. That's all going to go into the portrayal of Bond. 15 points for the Bond women in the film, primarily given to whoever is the most screen time woman of that film. Because a few films may have more than one quote-unquote Bond woman, be they a hero or villain or whatever. But most of the points given here to that main Bond woman, whoever it's going to be in the film. 10 points for the villains of the movie, which could be, again, primarily given to that iconic adversary he's mostly against, although there could be a few points, again, thrown in for some of those side villains on the side, or maybe some of the other villains off camera, or the shadows that we don't necessarily see who they are. All right, and 30 points given to the plot of the movie. Does it make sense? Was it fun? Did they go to some fun locations for this? Is it something that had me actually excited to watch as the movie went through? These are technically spy movies. 007's a spy. So there should be an element of mystery to this as well. Is this something that I, as the viewer, am trying to figure out as I'm going through? Or did they produce this movie and shoot this movie in such a way that I know everything and I'm just kind of watching it play out, more of a dramatic irony sense of viewing this whole thing. That puts us at 85 points. And then the last 15 points are given to the action of the film. So did we have good fight scenes, shootouts? Were there good stunt scenes that took place? Did we get any driving scenes, boating scenes, flying scenes, explosions? Did we get, all of these types of things included in the action? And then lastly, no points awarded for this because we're at 100, but I will also include what my favorite line of the movie was. And these are, spoiler alert, probably going to be a lot of the terrible James Bond puns that are, very noteworthy in these series, very well known. So there we go. So that's my 100-point criteria. And we're going to say again that if it is 70 or higher, I'm going to rate that as a classic for you to go out and watch that. If it is below 70, we're going to call that crap. And you're definitely going to want to pass that and never watch that, okay? If you've never seen a Bond film before, I should say this on the onset here as well, these in some ways are iconic. In other ways, people probably would argue that these may have aged a little poorly for some regards. Primarily the portrayal of the character of James Bond himself could be seen as slightly problematic with some of the ways he interacts with women in some of these. There is some man on woman, like a movie I just watched downstairs. There was a man, he slapped a lady, which probably would be a little more frowned upon today. They're kind of treated more as objects of affection, mostly in these films, although that is going to play into my score for the Bond women, because if they are just merely eye candy or sex appeal, that's probably going to get them a lower score than somebody who actually is a character that can match up with James Bond or other characters in the film. So that's probably where you're going to get most, I would guess, of the trouble with James Bond here in 2023. And, one of the fun things for me watching through these this summer is going to be also seeing how that character actually evolves from film to film and actor to actor. Am I going to notice anything going from Sean Connery to Daniel Craig? We'll find out, I guess, as we go through these. Like I said, I haven't seen a lot of these movies before. One other note before we get started on this review today is at some point this summer, I will be doing a playthrough of GoldenEye 007 on the N64 itself with the standard N64 controller and graphics, not one of the re-releases or remakes or remasters or anything else with a different controller on a different system or newer system. It's going to be the OG Nintendo 64 GoldenEye 007. We're going to go through the game probably on one of the more medium difficulties, not the easiest and probably not the hardest. But that's going to be a really fun one because of all the iconic memories I have, mostly in the multiplayer in that game. But, I did have a lot of fun playing through the single player mode as well, and the mission changed depending on what you had the difficulty on, etc. I haven't revisited that game probably in about, 19 years, I would guess. So I'm expecting it to be much worse than it is in my memory, and it may help destroy this perfect image I have of the game in my head just for how much fun I had with it. But I know the graphics are terrible because I have Googled some images of those, and it's going to be a trip. So whenever I do get to that one this summer, expect a lot of swearing on there and also a lot of memories and me kind of talking about, things I remember fondly about that game and the times in my life when I played that game. So looking forward to that sometime. That's another little challenge I agreed to on air. And as Joe Janka should know, anything you agree to on air should be a binding contract. But, sometimes we wimp out on those things. So there's that. Okay, here we go. It's Dr. No, the first film in the James Bond legacy. We're going way back to the 60s. I think this was 1962, as I mentioned, in England, came over to America in 63. And that was really the same year the next one came out. So I think I read there was even sometimes they put the two together as like a double feature. So Dr. No, 1962 in England. This is what kicks off the James Bond legacy. Now, if you're aware of this character and its history, the novels that a lot of these stories are pulled from by no relative of mine, Ian Fleming, that I know of at least, the novels came out ahead of time. So they adapt a lot of these to film. There are some later movies in this line that are just purely from a line or maybe a chapter or whatever you want to say, and they take the name from that particular thing and they expand that to a full film, which was never a novel, but it's just a way to kind of milk the franchise out for more money, because it has been a very successful franchise, even though, individually, none of the films are like the top movies of all time. When you have 20 some films in your film line, collectively, they've made quite a bit of money at this point. So that's where we're at with all of that. Okay, let's get into this. So Dr. No, scoring as we go along here. Title of this movie, I actually like the title of this movie mostly. Dr. No is the ultimate villain in this film, but we don't see him until an hour and 20 minutes into the movie, which, pretty bold choice. I can't imagine a lot of movies today that would name the film after the villain, but not have the villain be in the film until so much later on. If you watched, I don't know, one of the Avengers movies, but you called it Thanos, the movie, and then you didn't have Thanos until hour and 20 minutes into the movie, might be some blowback on that today, but I mostly like it here. The only thing I don't necessarily enjoy about it is it's surprising they didn't call this first one James Bond. They do have a little disclaimer. I don't know if it's in the official title or not, but it says something like Ian Fleming's James Bond 007 in Dr. No, which I guess is a cool way to kind of start a franchise. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the controversy with the Knives Out and Benoit Blanc and Glass Onion controversy we talked about in the Glass Onion episode. What do you name something? Do you keep the name of your character in the title, or how do you decide what it should be based on, the plot or whatnot? Anyway, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 for the title on this one. On to the theme for 10 points. Iconic, because this introduces the wonderful James Bond theme, which has a really nice big band, sound to it. And it's iconic. You know that one. It's used in the video games. It's used in all the movies. It's used usually multiple times in the movies for chase scenes or whatever the case is. I have to give this an 8 out of 10, unfortunately. And you might be asking yourself, why would you do that if you're praising it as really one of the most iconic movie themes? I would include it maybe top 20 or 30 of all time. The reason is, if you listen to the intro credits on this movie, you get that awesome James Bond theme, but it is blended with a little bit of Caribbean music because of where it takes place in Jamaica. And then it also morphs into a rendition of Three Blind Mice. For reasons in the plot here, we got the three guys pretending to be blind who are actually evil, et cetera, et cetera. But they blend it all into one song. So because those are all messy together, I'm going to dock it a couple points down to an 8 out of 10. Of course, the song is iconic. I don't dispute that. But we do have, just the way it's presented here, it's going to lose a couple points. All right, next up, Portrayal of Bond, 15 points. We have Sean Connery, of course, at the beginning here, the OG Bond on film. And for the most part, he handles himself pretty smoothly here, I would say. He seems pretty comfortable in the character's skin. For the most part, does his own stunts. I don't know that he is necessarily given a ton to work with in this one. So I'm going to give him a 12 out of 15 on this for Portrayal. Pretty good. Next up, the Bond women. This may shock a few people because Ursula Andress plays Honey Rider. And yes, that's another point of contention with these Bond films is the completely ridiculous and I would say oftentimes humorous as well. Names that they come up with for some of the women character in these movies, again, most likely would not be as accepted today. Although we get some really bizarrely named characters in movies today, thinking like Bullet Train or some of the Tarantino films or whatever. So it's not to say it doesn't happen still because it does, but she is a sex symbol of the 60s and she has, the iconic bikini on when she is looking for shells and James Bond meets her for the first time on the beach. She's kind of late into the movie that she appears and is really just there as like barely even a plot device. I mean, she's really there just for James Bond to have a lady to play off and to show how suave he is, etc. She doesn't really do a lot for me, I'll be honest. Some people probably like her, but I'm going to give her an 8 out of 15. So not great, in my opinion. I know she's iconic. I know the bikini and her on the beach is iconic, but just as a character, I did not find her all that complex or compelling. On to the villains. This is a tough movie to rate for villains for a couple reasons. There are, minor henchmen that are off throughout the movie, and there is the secret bad guy who is Dr. No, but we don't see him until so late into the film. And just because he's the first bad guy, leader, I guess, if you will, that we're introduced to, I'm going to give him a few bumps for that. He is the one who is going to reveal to James Bond that there is a new secret organization called Spectre, which has some ridiculous words that it is an anagram for. I don't even know all those words because it doesn't really matter at this point. Spectre has just kind of become its own thing in the film universe, just like scuba in real life. So tough one here. He's kind of a weird character in that he has metal hands, which he demonstrates to James Bond. He can crush things with, which is interesting later in the film, getting into plot a little bit here. But at the end, when he defeats Dr. No, Dr. No is unable to climb up a metal pole because his hands slip and slip and slip and slip down the metal pole because they're metal. And he, I don't know, apparently can't flex them, even though he could crush a can earlier in the movie. So a little inconsistent with that. But regardless, he's the first one, so I got to bump him a little bit just for that reason. He's going to get an 8 out of 10 from me as a villain in this one. On to our plot. Oh, boy. Well, we get some subterfuge here. We have people, breaking into embassies, and this all takes place in Jamaica, I should say, for this first film. We have a couple exotic locales called Crab Key, whereas the secret radioactive mining is going on, and there's, Dr. No's headquarters. We have cool boat scenes that take place in the movie. We have some pretty interesting side characters he meets. He meets an agent for America that the viewer actually kind of thinks maybe is a villain at first, as he's like tracking him at the airport and whatnot. And this is a great chance to kind of show how he interacts, this is James Bond, with some of those other people he meets, because he essentially is agent for hire. Britain sends him to some location, and then he is entirely working with the people there at that place. So he does get some stuff to do in this film. It's not a ton, and even though they keep kind of like Crab Key and Dr. No a secret, I didn't find it all that thrilling. To be quite frank, at the plot here, we have some shenanigans about, like I said, radioactive things taking place, and that could lead to, I think, missiles or something of that nature. And we're in the 60s here. This is the 62. Remember, this comes out 63 in America, same year as Kennedy dies, and we got the Cuban Missile Crisis going on and all those things. We're in the middle of the Cold War, so you can kind of get a good flavor of that with some of the things happening here. That being said, again, it's an okay plot. It's not fantastic. I give it a 20 out of 30 for a score on this one. And then lastly, the action scenes. Not fantastic choreography. The fight scenes in the 60s probably are not going to be great. I'm anticipating that ahead of time. Do get a couple fun things here with the tarantula being used. We get some shootouts, of course, as this takes place. There's all sorts of stuff that happens when they're at Dr. No's base. I mean, James basically sets the stuff into like overdrive, or the base is going to melt down essentially from the radioactiveness, and the coolers are turned off, and the whole thing has to be evacuated before it blows up. And so we do get some explosions, some other things in here. I'm looking for a little more like hand-to-hand or shootout type stuff than there was in this. So I'm going to give it a 10 out of 15 on that one. All right. And then that brings us to our total for the first film, Dr. No, which if I add this up here, 4, 8, 12, 8, 8, 20, and 10 gives us a nice even 70 points on the money. So I have to label our first film in our series review as classic, but by the absolute thinnest of margins on this one. 70 out of 100, which is exactly the cutoff for what I'm classifying as classic versus crap this summer. 70 out of 100. Favorite line in this one is going to go to the moment when James Bond, Sean Connery, meets Honey Rider, Ursula Andress' character, when she's on the beach, and she says to him, "What are you doing, looking for shells?" And he says, "No, I'm just looking," which I like that line. So there we go. All right, first movie review of the 60th anniversary, at least in America, of James Bond, and my first watch through of all of these, even though I've owned the DVD box set for literally 10 years. I still haven't gotten around to watching all these, so I will definitely make sure to get through all these this summer, and I got a busy summer, but I will figure out a way to get through all these as well, and bring the goods to all of you as well, and share them with you. All right, this has been the Fondcast, the Fond Pod, friends occasionally not disagreeing. If you haven't checked us out before and you happen to be a first-time listener, we are a podcast that has been on, about a year and a half almost now at this point, which is hard to believe. We are a series of hosts who mix and match for different episodes we cover. We are on topics like comics and television, movies and music. We talk about supernatural and true crime, occasionally dabble in wrestling as well, but basically anything under the sun. And we have, as I mentioned, about 8 hosts who kind of rotate through each of these episodes. And, we have a lot of fun doing that. We goof around. We do swear a little bit more than we are in this particular episode with just myself. And, we always have a good time with that. So we like to bring that and share that with you everywhere we can. We are on every single platform I can find to get us on at this point to stream. So we're on Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, Audible, Facebook, iTunes, Podcast Addict, Stitcher, and other ones that I'm probably not even aware of. So that's all out there. You can also catch our updates, questions, and fan interactions by searching Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing on Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and also Instagram. And lastly, you can always go to fondpodcast, FONDPODCAST.com, where you can check out all things behind the scenes for us. Check out who our hosts are, what their interests are. You can check out some of the past episodes we've done lumped by genre topic. So if you're a fan of supernatural things, you can quickly find which ones are our supernatural episodes, for example. As well as just check out kind of the headquarters for all things that we do. We have merchandise available on there as well. If you like us, please tell a friend about us. Leave us some 5-star reviews wherever you get your podcasts, and stop in, check us out, subscribe, and we'll see you again next time on Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Bye, everyone.